Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. And I'm so glad you've joined me tonight because here we are at part 5 of our story, which is getting very, very exciting. And so if you haven't heard part 1, part 2, part 3 and part 4, click on the description because you don't want to miss out on a really good story. And this is quite a fabulous story that I know you're going to enjoy. So let's continue with part 5 of our story. You could be in grievous danger, Simone, but at the moment Oliver needs you alive because you stand to inherit your mother's fortune. Without you alive, there will be no money for Oliver. You need to go to the police and tell them exactly what you told me. I'm sure they will understand that you were afraid of Oliver, which was why you did his bidding, when you wrote the suicide note and crushed all those pills. I'm surprised you didn't realise that a dead body is not exactly going to assimilate pills after the body has shut down, and that the medical examiner would likely conclude that Elspeth had been suffocated. All of a sudden, we hear an ominous car engine approaching us. At first I thought my husband Graham had woken up, to find his side of the bed empty, and had gone out to look for me. But then I remembered my car was still in the parking lot. I realised by the distinctive familiar navy blue truck rolling towards us at a feisty, indignant speed that was going far too fast for a tumultuous dirt road like this, that this was no other than Simone's husband Oliver. And by the way he was driving, he was not a happy bunny. He drew up next to our car, killing his engine, keeping on his headlights that pierced through the darkness obtrusively. I watched in abject horror as Oliver climbed out of his car, slamming his car door behind him violently, and looking in at us through the car window with a murderous, very fearsome scowl on his face. I didn't know whether to drive away or to stand my ground. I felt every cell in my body prickling with terror, and I began to anchor myself to the car by clutching the steering wheel as tightly as I could, so much so that my knuckles began to show through the skin. I decided to stay stoically parked in the road. It would be better to appear that I had no knowledge of what Oliver had done to Elspeth. If I drove away, it would be blindingly obvious that I knew the truth about the murder, and put me and Simone in greater jeopardy. So I steadfastly remained seated in the car, trying desperately to appear nonchalant and relaxed, as if it was perfectly normal to have a chinwag with Simone at such an early hour of the morning. I couldn't let Oliver see that beneath the very aloof veneer that I was projecting, that I was a bundle of nerves, and my heart was leapfrogging in my chest, my stomach recoiling in trepidation. He thundered towards us, with a face as black as a thundercloud. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he was screaming at Simone, banging on the window. I wound down my window and said, "Oliver, it might be nice if you actually said hello. Why are you in such a capricious mood? I mean, you really got out of the wrong side of the bed, didn't you?" "Why am I in such a capricious mood? Are you joking, Claudia? That's rich coming from you. I'd think that was blindingly obvious. I'll tell you why I'm in a capricious mood. I wake up in bed to discover my wife has slipped out of her bed in the middle of the night without telling me where she's going. And then here you are, the both of you, having a nice cosy chat together at this insane hour of the night on a sequestered country road. What am I supposed to think? It was lucky I spotted you here when I was about to turn down your driveway, Claudia. I knew at once that Simone had come running to you, Claudia. My wife is so predictable. She's like a pane of glass. You can see through her. If she wants to talk, she can talk to me. What is a man supposed to think?" He cocked his head at a strange angle, studying us curiously. I guess he was trying to figure out whether Simone had confided in me or not about the murder, and how he'd killed Elspeth Hancock. I felt very uncomfortable as Oliver scrutinized me. My cheeks were burning. I could feel the fire of this heat rising up from my chest, and sensed sweat was breaking out on my hands and back, something that has never happened to me before since, My mind was screaming, "Stay calm, Claudia. If Oliver knows you know what he did to Elspeth, your life could be in perilous danger. If he killed Elspeth, he won't hesitate to kill you." "I'm so sorry, Oliver. I did suggest that Simone phoned you to let you know her whereabouts, in case you got worried, but she insisted you were a deep sleeper. She didn't want to wake you up. She's grieving the loss of her mother, and wanted a girly chat with me, that's all. We're talking about Elspeth, how much we miss her. It was my suggestion we parked further down the road away from the house. I didn't want to wake up my husband either, nor the kids, of course." This time it was Oliver's face that turned as red as a field of poppies, and even in the moonlight I could see that clearly.
"If you wanted to talk, Simone, you could have talked to me about Elspeth, instead of coming here in the middle of the night so clandestinely to talk to Claudia about your mother. It's ridiculous getting out of your bed in the middle of the night like this," he growled contemptuously, his piggy blue eyes glowering at his wife through the ubiquitous folds of flesh that gathered around his face and under his jowls like a turkey's neck. "You need to get out of the car now and come home with me, Simone. Right now," he ordered. "Your behaviour tonight has been insane."
"To be fair, Oliver," I said, "Simone is very upset about her mother's passing. It's perfectly understandable. She couldn't get to sleep. She wanted to talk to me about her mother. She needed a female companion. I'm sure you must appreciate that. Please don't be too hard on her, Oliver. We all grieve in different ways."
"Quit making excuses for my wife, Claudia. You're well-meaning, I know, but keep your nose out of our business, will you? Now get out of the car, Simone. I'm taking you home."
"I don't want to come with you," said Simone, trembling. "I want to stay here with Claudia. Why don't you go away and leave me alone?" she said, her eyes brimming with tears. "You're such a bully, Oliver, and I'm tired of being ordered around by you. This is my life. If I want to speak to Claudia, it's my business what I do. It's got nothing to do with you. Please go away, will you? I'll be back later in my car, I promise. Just give me some space, will you?" I realized Simone looked frightened. Maybe she was scared that if she returned home, that her husband might find out what she had told me, and that I knew the truth about what had happened to Elspeth, and there would be less than favourable consequences when he learnt that his wife had betrayed his trust. Oliver was now seething.
"You're going to come with me now, Simone. Do you understand? Claudia can drive your car back to her house, and in the morning we'll pick your car up. Do you understand?"
"I'm not coming with you, Oliver. I'm staying here. You can't force me to do anything I don't want to do," she said indignantly.
"I see what this is all about. You've told Claudia, haven't you?" Oliver growled. "You've told her, you idiot. I told you to keep your mouth shut. You're a liability, that's what you are."
"She won't tell anyone, will you, Claudia?" said Simone, looking at me pleadingly. "No, of course I won't say a thing. Your secret's safe with me, Oliver. I won't breathe a word, I promise."
"You idiot, Simone! Look what you've done. Of course Claudia will blab. She's a liability. Get out of the car now!"
he shrieked at his wife. She trembled violently, reluctantly opening the passenger side door, fear pooling in her eyes. He dragged her aggressively out of the car, throwing her roughly off her feet, so she staggered precariously, falling backwards on the ground and wincing in pain. To my horror, Oliver leaned over towards me on the car seat. He'd pulled something out from the side of his belt, and I realized to my astonishment it was a revolver. I could not believe that this was happening to me. Surely not. It seemed so surreal. This sort of thing happened in the movies, but not in real life. Surely not. I willed myself to believe it was all an illusory dream, shutting my eyes as tightly as I could, to block out the reality of this indelible traumatic moment. Oliver's voice threw me out of my denial, as if I'd been flung from the ground into the crashy, thunderous water of an icy cold ocean, and was being threshed around violently by the waves.
"Any last words, Claudia?" he asked me,
placing the revolver at my temple. I'd never known Oliver to carry a weapon on his person before, but tonight he meant business. I could see the resolute determination in his blue eyes. He was going to kill me in any second, and the moment seemed to last for a lifetime. My whole body froze like a large block of ice, and I knew that my life was over. The barrel of the gun was so cold and hard on my skin. I was poignantly aware that I was seconds away from being thrown into oblivion. "Please don't, Oliver. You really don't need to do this. I promise you, I won't tell the police a thing. I'll keep Storm. I won't betray your trust. You're part of the family. Families stick together, don't they?"
"Claudia, don't start playing games with me. Do I look like an idiot? You've never liked me. You are a danger to me, a threat thanks to my wife, and I'm not going to prison on account of you. You can bet your bottom dollar about that."
I stared at the revolver incredulously. I waited for my head to explode. There was no point in fighting back. I'd seen enough horror movies to know one shot to the head, and it would all be over for me. Thank God it would be quick, and I would be spared any suffering. But I really did not want to die. I had children that needed me, and a life that still needed to be lived. But there was no reasoning with a manic man like Oliver. I remember that time. It just stood still, as if I was holding an elastic band back, as wide as I possibly could, to prolong the agony. But when the elastic band snapped, it would all come to an end. I watched as Oliver pulled the trigger, but it didn't fire. He tried again and again, and I realized the barrel was empty. He cursed under his breath furiously.
That bitch! That bitch! She took the bullets out of my revolver,"
he growled. I was to learn that it was very shrewd thinking on Simone's part when she had clandestinely removed all the bullets from her husband's gun, for she feared her own life might be in mortal jeopardy, and was grievously concerned it might well be used against her, now that she knew what her husband was capable of. Simone screamed out to me, "Run, Claudia, run! He's still going to kill you! You need to get away! Go into the woods!" I managed to open the car door, and I hightailed it through the woods, my body quivering like a jelly. I then heard Simone crying out, and I suspected that Oliver had ruthlessly lashed out at her. She was crying, "Please don't! Please don't, Oliver! Don't kill Claudia! You can't kill her! Leave her be! I know she won't tell the police about what you did, but please, I beg you, don't hurt her!"
"This is all your fault, Simone. If you hadn't blabbed like you did, Simone would be in one piece. But now she's a dead woman thanks to you. You have killed her. I warned you about this, but would you listen? No, you wouldn't. Of course you wouldn't. That's too much."
"Please, Oliver, don't do anything stupid," came her desperate cries. "I'm really sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to tell her." I heard him swearing at his wife, and then it became very silent, ominously quiet, so much so that for a moment I wondered if Simone was actually dead. It turned out he'd knocked her out cold, so she couldn't call the police while he was in hot pursuit of me. He'd deal with her later by using his masterful manipulative tactics to keep his wife's mouth firmly shut. Right now his prime focus was to get me. He was determined to kill me in order to shut me up, and that was exactly what he intended to do. The man was unfit, but at 6 foot tall and over 300 pounds, he was strong, and I was no match for someone of his size. At least I had a fighting chance of getting away from Oliver. It was so dark and gloomy in the woods, and I was afraid of falling and tripping over forest debris that I couldn't see clearly, or large formidable dips in the ground, or worse still, gnarled roots that trespassed obtrusively through the earthen floor, like clandestine animal traps that were resolutely determined to bring me to my knees, as they could so easily throw me off my feet and twist an ankle if I wasn't paying close attention. I couldn't afford to allow that to happen, or I would be a sitting duck for Oliver. I had no torch with me, nor did I carry on my person a cell phone, which was most unfortunate. I realised that I'd foolishly left it on the side table while unlatching the front door to get to Simone. Simone's visit had been so last minute, I had overlooked such considerations. I could barely see my hand in front of my face, and it was like running through the woods with a blindfold over my eyes, as the trees stood together like an army battalion, and the deciduous trees that stood among the evergreens stretched out their boughs so wide, as if determined to block out any moonlight. So the forest had become a tenebrific labyrinth of trees. I began to run as fast as I possibly could, but I was often forced to slow down to a snail's pace when the darkness was so densely thick that I couldn't see anything at all. The soles of my sneakers were kicking up dirt and fallen leaves. My heart was heavy as it thundered violently in my chest. Every beat was so loud I was sure the whole forest could hear it, and most especially Oliver, whose threat loomed over me the closer he got to me. I could hear his heavy boots pounding the forest floor, and I knew he was gaining fast ground on me, and that he clearly had a flashlight with him, so he had a huge advantage over me. A voice in my head kept persuading me to keep running, but my flailing legs felt like cement beneath me, and I felt as if my strength was waning, like that of a dying bird. I had come so close to losing my life. If there had been a bullet in that barrel, I would be dead by now. It made me feel violently sick, as bitter bile rose up in the back of my throat, and for a brief moment the nausea slowed me down, and I thought I would heave and deliver the contents of my stomach over a bush or two. Even though I couldn't see where I was going, I had to keep moving steadily forward. I could make out the lofty silhouettes of the trees from time to time, when a soft trickle of moonlight suddenly bounced through the trees, and I was so grateful for that. I navigated my way through the trails, more from instinct than anything else. I could hear the sounds of the crickets and frogs, and the odd howl of a coyote and the hoot of an owl. But I continued to run, because I needed to get out of here as fast as I could. But the trees seemed to go on forever and ever, and I had no concept of where I was going. I felt so terribly lost, so confused, so disorientated. Then I heard the unwelcome sound of Oliver's booming voice, and the tread of his heavy boots thundering through the forest, getting closer and closer and closer, so that I could sense it wouldn't be long before the man was breathing down my neck like a dragon, with his vaporous breath that I'd noticed had smelt strongly of booze when I'd been talking to him moments before. I'm sure he had drunk way more than just a couple of beers, as Simone had implied, but he could hold his alcohol better than most. In the distance I could see the flash of his light that was so powerful it lit up all the trees. I looked around the forest floor for anything that could protect me, anything that could potentially save my life. I managed to find a long, very solid piece of timber that would be a useful weapon. If I was going to die, I'd put up a fight and hit him as hard as I could, aiming for the groin and the head. But if the worst came to the very worst, I would scratch Oliver as hard as I could, leaving skin cells under my nails for DNA evidence, because when push came to shove, he was not going to get away with this. Oliver's voice echoed through the woods as he got closer and closer, and I knew the only thing I could do was to hide in the obscure shadows. So I quickly took cover behind a tree and stood very still, hardly daring to breathe, as Oliver neared his approach, and was so uncomfortably close I could potentially have almost reached out to touch him. I was certain he was going to see me, as he had a powerful torch in his hands, which he was shining through the trees, and he knew, in this dark clawing abyss that had expunged all the light, soaking it up like a sea sponge, he would know with a salient confidence that I would not have got very far in my journey through the trees. In a trice
The darkness was suddenly vanquished by the brazen light of his intrusive torch. If I moved an inch or dared to cough or sneeze, I'd give myself away, and I couldn't believe it because I had a tickle at the back of my throat, and I was desperate to sneeze, and it was so hard to restrain myself from just letting go. But I managed to hold that sneeze in. I was gripping onto the piece of timber so hard, ready to launch an attack on Oliver, if needs must.
You cannot have got very far, Claudia, without any light in here. It's very dark. You might as well give yourself up, because I'm going to find you. And when I do, it's over cadovers for you. You see, Claudia, I know your type well. I've never liked you, you know. Never seen what my wife saw in you. You're not like Simone. She's easily controlled. You are like a hand grenade, and that's a big problem for me. Women like you are a liability. You're like an untamed wildfire that needs to be put out, or there's problems.
My mind was doing somersaults as thoughts whirled around my head frantically. He's going to find you, Claudia, and he's going to kill you. He's going to make it look like an accident. Maybe he'll bury you, and you'll never be found. And your disappearance will make the police think you killed Elspeth and ran away to avoid conviction. Because I knew Oliver was clever. He could make an accident look like a suicide, or he could make a disappearance look like a guilty conscience. I was hiding behind a large tree trunk, watching Oliver moving through the trees, casting his obtrusive light over everything. He was getting closer, and this time he was too close. I could actually see his breath coming out of his mouth. I was tempted to run, but if I did so, he'd catch up with me. He'd throw me violently to the ground. My best chance of survival was to remain very, very still. All of a sudden, someone was tapping me gently, but it wasn't Oliver, as I could see this very distinctive, ungainly shape looming behind me in the trees. For a moment, I thought it was Simone. I turned around, and that was when I saw him. I recognized him at once. The Bigfoot I'd seen from my kitchen window almost every night when I was washing the dishes at my sink. I wasn't afraid seeing the Bigfoot, as it was like seeing the jaws of life when you're lying within the folds of metal after a devastating accident in your car, and your life is precariously hanging in the balance and ticking away. What I did next surprised even me. I grabbed the Bigfoot by the hair on his arm and pointed into the woods towards Oliver, who was only feet away from me, his back facing away from me. The Bigfoot's yellow eyes looked down on mine, and I looked up into his. I had to crane my head because he was so terribly tall. At a guess, I would say he was easily 8 foot tall or even more. He had a very distinctive face that was so human-looking. I noticed he had a slight jagged scar on his cheeks, and he had heavily furrowed forehead and a bit of white hair on the lower neck, like you often see in dogs and cats, although he didn't have much of a neck at all. I noticed his hair was very long and silky, and in the dark shadows it looked black, although as to the exact shade it was, I couldn't be sure. He could have been a dark brown colour for all I knew. I could see him so clearly, because the light of Oliver's torch had illuminated the entire woodgrove. I wanted to speak to him, but I was held hostage to my fear, as coming so close to death had derailed me, which was a joke in the circumstances, as I should have been terrified of the Bigfoot. But I knew instinctively he imposed no threat to me at all. It is hard, if not impossible, to explain, but the Bigfoot was gentle and benevolent towards me, which certainly contradicts stories I've heard of Bigfoot encounters that have been dangerously threatening. This Bigfoot wore his heart on his sleeve, and I have never beheld a greater kindness than the kindness I saw in his dark eyes, and I suddenly felt swaddled by the safety that he cocooned me in, by just physically being in his presence. Relief washed over me, like the warm waves baptizing my feet on the seashore. I observed that the Bigfoot physically frowned, as he studied Oliver through narrowing hooded eyes. Oliver trudged further away from us, scanning the grove with the piercing light of his torch. The lines on the Bigfoot's forehead began to furrow in perplexement. He looked almost like a police dog, the way he was watching Oliver so attentively, as if his ears were perking up, and he was listening to every single sound that Oliver was making. He was incredibly alert and paying close attention to Oliver's every move. He glanced at me briefly, looking into my eyes. I desperately tried to communicate with him. I opened and closed my mouth, but I felt as if my vocal cords were severed, as nothing came out of my mouth. But in my mind I was saying, "Help! Please help! He's going to kill me! Please help!" To my amazement, words came back into my head that were not my own. I knew they were coming from the Bigfoot.
"Don't you worry. I will eliminate the problem for you. I knew he was up to no good. You look terribly frightened. Just you stay there."
I was gobsmacked. I had communicated telepathically with the Bigfoot. Had that really just happened? It seemed so far-fetched, so unbelievable, so surreal. But I felt like he was my friend, and he was going to help me. Suddenly I knew with absolute certainty that I was going to be safe, and I stood watching behind the tree to see what would happen next. This Bigfoot was so incredibly intimidating. I knew that Oliver would be absolutely petrified to encounter this beast. For a moment, the Bigfoot stood very still behind the tree, watching Oliver. And I think Oliver must have sensed his presence or that he was being watched, because he kept looking nervously behind him. I was sure the Bigfoot would scare him off, and then I would get back home safely to call the police. But that is not what happened. When the Bigfoot said he'd eliminate the problem, he meant it literally, as I imagine his word elimination means just that. The Bigfoot moved stealthily towards Oliver, but Oliver did not see him at first, with the blazing light of his torch. But he did appear to sense something, because he suddenly looked very, very nervous. He started to tremble a bit awkwardly, and he kept looking around him suspiciously. I suspect he could feel the formidable presence of the Bigfoot, but he could see nothing, even though the Bigfoot was a hair's breadth away from him. He was hurriedly shining his torch through every nook and cranny in the woodgrove, but he continued to see nothing, until finally his light landed on the Bigfoot. For a moment I don't think he could believe what he was actually seeing, because his torchlight lit up the Bigfoot and the light cascaded over his gargantuan form. Oliver let out a loud gasp. He was horrified when he saw the Bigfoot. His eyes widened in terror, his mouth opening and closing. He then retracted his torch, as if he doubted what he'd actually physically seen, only to return his torchlight, to shine it blazingly on the creature again. At this point I think it hit him like a brick over the head, that what he was perceiving was actually real, not a mere figment of his imagination, or a dark ambiguous shadow he thought looked like a monster. He must have realized in abject horror that the daunting, imposing, gargantuan figure standing before him was a Bigfoot, and he imposed a deadly threat. I hoped for a moment he was seeing his life flash before him, like I had done when he placed the barrel of the gun on my temple. The Bigfoot was standing very, very still, not moving an inch. He was like a tree trunk, and you might have suspected as much if your eyes had scanned past him. But he appeared to be studying Oliver closely, almost as if looking through a glass pane. Oliver stared at him and screamed in rapid succession, and then he began to run as fast as he could. He was breathing furiously, running through the woods like a bat out of hell, whimpering all the way like a crying child. The Bigfoot seemed to be deliberately allowing him to get ahead. And then in a few large strides he caught up with Oliver, grabbing him by the legs, dragging him across the forest floor. He was kicking and screaming and crying out for help, but no one came to his aid, and his body continued to be dragged along the ground, and was being violently grazed by the intrusive rocks, roots and ferns that crossed his path. He continued to scream in terror, and that scream still haunts my darkest nightmares, for I have never heard anything like it even in a movie. I stood there very still, watching in awe, feeling a certain amount of satisfaction that the man who had put a gun to my temple moments before was getting exactly what he deserved. I hoped he was terrified out of his wits. The Bigfoot put him out of his misery so fast. He leant over him and just snapped his head like that, with a loud click. I could see Oliver lying on the ground, his eyes glazed over like a dead fish, his mouth wide open. For a while I just stood there staring at the Bigfoot in bemusement as he stared back at me.
Ankinatuana, tola bishakikwa. He was a bad, bad man, he said to me. Helan takwani. I eliminated him for you.
I ran over to the Bigfoot and threw my arms around him, although my arms were so small and so fragile in his. I couldn't even reach very far. But he grabbed me gently, put me on his lap like a little girl, and rocked me. I burst into tears. I cried and cried, sobbing in his chest, so that my tears actually wet his hair.
Tilatua, pakila solo. He's gone. He cannot hurt you now, the Bigfoot told me. Helatiswana. I won't let anyone hurt you. Holatila bokosha. I watch your family every night. Holotona. You see me from your window, do you not? Kila tikana kwasika. I guard these woods, even from some of my own kind. And I guard all who live in them.
The Bigfoot walked by my side through the trees until we got to the sequestered country road, where the two cars were parked, the car belonging to Oliver and the car belonging to his wife Simone. That was when I observed that my sister-in-law Simone was sitting in the front seat of Oliver's car. I discovered her lying there slumped on the seat. She had been knocked out cold and was slowly but surely coming around, slurring her words like an inebriated drunk. She was certainly confused and disorientated, and didn't seem to know where she was. I suspected Oliver had knocked her out to prevent her from calling the police, while he pursued me to ensure that he took me out, so I would not impose a threat to him. I'm sure he believed he could control Simone, so that he could finally get his grubby hands on Elspeth's inheritance. I called the police to tell them what had happened, admitting, of course, that Oliver had been attacked by a Bigfoot. That I did not mention. I feigned surprise when they claimed they'd discovered his deceased body, and they never really got to the bottom of how he died, but I wisely said nothing. I was to find the annoying detective that had kept hounding me to ask questions all about Simone and her husband, who had been investigating the death of my mother-in-law, had had a gut feeling from the very beginning that Oliver was behind her demise. But I have to say, with Oliver out of the picture, life was so much better for the all of us. 2 years later, I can hear the trill of merry laughter in the living room as I carry away the dirty dishes from the finished main course back into the kitchen. Simone is trailing behind me. She's heavily pregnant with twins. The last IVF treatment she had was a huge success, and both fetuses took. She looks radiant, and her face is glowing with contentment, and she has met a wonderful man to share her life with. They got married over a year ago. "Where is he?" she asks me excitedly, as she dashes over to the kitchen sink and slips the dirty dishes into the soapy water. She is rambunctiously enthusiastic. My heart sinks, because I'm not sure the Bigfoot will show himself to Simone. Simone seems to read my thoughts, because she gingerly asks me, "Do you think he'll show himself to me, Claudia?" "I'm not sure," I say. "I see him most nights, but he's incredibly intuitive, so he'll know you're here, and he might not wish to show himself to you." Simone looks visibly disappointed. "Why not?" she asks. I shrug my shoulders. "I don't understand it myself," I tell her, "but I know that the Bigfoot is very selective about who he shows himself to. My son has seen him a few times, but my husband and daughter have never seen him before." "But I want to see him so much," said Simone, her voice sounding almost urgent. "I mean, if it wasn't for him, you would almost certainly be dead, and I'd likely be under the formidable control of Oliver, who would be ensuring I kept my mouth shut over everything.
Thanks to that Bigfoot, life is so much better for me these days. I know it's an awful thing to say, but it's true. I had no idea how much Oliver controlled me and eroded all my confidence. I had such a low self-esteem back then. I turned a blind eye to his licentious behaviour, but now look at me. I'm a whole new woman. Even the way I met James was bizarre, don't you think? I mean, when do you ever meet a romantic partner in a computer shop of all things? I never even talked to anyone beyond the shop assistants in a computer store. But there James was. And I know it sounds crazy and nonsensical, but he walked over to me and said,
I don't mean to intrude, but don't waste your money on that computer over there, when you can buy a cheaper model that's equally as efficient.
Even now, he doesn't know why he did it. He said it was like a nudge that propelled him forwards. And I think it was my mother that brought us together. I really do. You know what, Simone? I said, I believe you. Nothing would surprise me about that woman. Even in death, I suspect she's watching over us. We stand at the kitchen sink together, and Simone almost drops the plate in her hands onto the kitchen floor. Her pretty face bursts into a bright, jubilant smile. I see him! I see him over there! He's so beautiful, better than I ever imagined. There he is, crossing your red brick driveway. The moon was bright that evening. We could see the Bigfoot so clearly. He stood there patiently, looking at us through the kitchen window, carrying something in his overlong arms that looked like a dead squirrel. He nodded at us twice. Normally he only nods at me once, so he was clearly acknowledging Simone. He stood there for a second longer, and I hear him saying in my head,
I'm watching over you, to keep you safe, as I've promised.
We watched him glide away, looking as if he was floating on air as he moved through the trees. Oh my goodness, said Simone. He spoke to me. Claudia, he spoke to me. He said, congratulations. You're having a girl and a boy. How can he know that, Simone? How does he even know I'm pregnant? I have no idea, I said to Simone. But in my experience, that Bigfoot has outer-worldly abilities. He just knows things. James, Simone's husband, comes rushing into the kitchen.
What do you two look so pleased about? He asked.
I would tell you, said Simone, grinning, but you wouldn't believe me if I did. But you know what, James? I've got a funny feeling that we're about to have a girl and a boy.
I thought you thought we were having 2 boys, he laughed. Why this sudden change of mind?
I don't know, said Simone. I guess I've had some kind of a prognostication, you could say.
Well, don't stay in the kitchen, gassing, said James. We're looking forward to dessert. That apple pie smells absolutely delicious, and I, for one, am very hungry for something sweet.
Coming up, said Simone, staring out of the window to see if she can see the Bigfoot again. But he's long gone. I can't believe he showed himself to me, she says to me, her eyes shining brightly. I think he wanted you to see him, I said. And Simone chuckles happily to herself. I'm having a girl and a boy, she says. I've had it affirmed by a Bigfoot. So there you are. That's my story. What an incredible story. And I feel very sorry for poor Simone, because she was married to a frightful man who was literally willing to do anything for his mother-in-law's money. And that is just horrifying. But you do get people like that in this world. There's a lot of greed out there. But what an amazing story. And wasn't it fantastic that Bigfoot came to the rescue? And this was a Bigfoot she saw every evening when she was washing dishes. And what were the chances he'd be watching over her when she was literally running for her life from that awful man? And things ended up perfect for all of them. And I'm so glad to see that Simone got her life back together and also got her dream of having the 2 children that she so desperately wanted to have. What a fabulous story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.